In order to heal someone, you got to walk into their trauma, walk into their pain, walk into the story. Even if I didn't think this guy had schizophrenia, for that moment he thought he had, so I had to walk into the schizophrenia with him. Even in that moment, he thought he would demon possess whatever it was. I had to walk into that demon possession with him. I think too often we minimize somebody else's pain. We minimize somebody else's concept of what they're going through because it doesn't agree with ours. And if you really want to heal someone, you have to be willing to walk into that someone's brokenness.
Welcome, welcome. I am Sujin Pak, and it's my great delight as the Dean of School of Theology to welcome you to the 2025 Lowell Lectures. Tonight, we are delighted to welcome Dr. Micah McCreary. He will speak on leading through and beyond our words, exploring the transformative journey of becoming a trauma-responsive leader by embracing, understanding, and transcending personal and collective wounds. Tonight's event is moderated by Dr. Stephen Sandage. Dr. Sandage is the Albert and Jesse Danielson Professor of Psychology, of Religion and Theology, with appointments in the School of Theology and the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences at Boston University. And he is also the Research Director and Staff Psychologist at the Danielson Institute. Dr. Sandage will provide a formal introduction of Dr. McCreary and also introduce our esteemed respondents, Muki Manalili, Dr. Eric Brown, and Dr. Emily Towns. So please join me in welcoming this evening's moderator, Dr. Stephen Sandage.
Thank you for being here tonight. It's my great honor and joy to introduce Dr. Micah McCreary, who is a professor of mine and a mentor of mine during my doctoral program at Virginia Commonwealth University. Huge positive impact on my life. So great to have you with us, Micah. So I'll do a little formal introduction and then a couple of brief narratives. Dr. Micah McCreary is president of New Brunswick Theological Seminary. A native of Detroit, Michigan, Reverend Dr. Micah McCreary has served as the 12th president of New Brunswick since 2017. He brings a rich and diverse academic background, holding a Bachelor of Science in Engineering from the University of Michigan, a Master of Divinity from the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology at Virginia Union University, and both a Master of Science and a PhD in Counseling Psychology from Virginia Commonwealth University. Dr. McCreary is the recipient of numerous prestigious fellowships, including the American Psychological Association's Minority Fellowship, the State Council of Higher Education in Virginia Fellowship, and the American Council on Education Presidential Fellowship. Before joining New Brunswick, Dr. McCreary was president and CEO of McCreary and Madison Associates, a psychological and human resources consulting firm in Richmond, Virginia. He also served for over 2 decades as a tenured associate professor of psychology at VCU, where he held several leadership roles, including assistant vice provost of diversity, quality enhancement plan coordinator, and co-director of the counseling psychology program. A respected scholar and speaker, Dr. McCreary is the author of Trauma and Race, A Pathway to Well-Being by Fortress Press in 2023, which has been doing very well. He's widely sought after as a preacher and teacher, frequently addressing topics such as trauma and race, church hurt and suicidal ideation, and the intersections of spirituality and psychology. Dr. McCreary is a member of the New Brunswick class of the Reformed Church of America. He was originally ordained by New Hope Baptist Church in Ann Arbor, Michigan, of the National Baptist Convention, with his ordination later recognized by the American Baptist Churches and received by the RCA in 2018. He was installed as General Synod Professor of Theology in the Reformed Church of America. He currently serves on the boards of Salvation and Social Justice and Carrier Pigeon Post, a publication supporting returning citizens. Together with his spouse, Reverend Dr. Jacqueline E. Madison McCreary, he pastored Spring Creek Baptist Church in Moseley, Virginia for 16 years. His earlier ministry roles included Director of Youth Ministry for the Baptist General Convention of Virginia, the source of those youth ministry stories, right? And Senior Pastor of Rising Mount Zion Baptist Church in Sandston, Virginia. The Reverend Doctors are proud parents of their daughter, Makita McCreary, a minister of worship and arts within a local congregation, who you'll get to see a little bit tonight, I think. So let me just briefly tell you a couple of stories about Dr. McCreary as an educator, right, and his impact on things that I got in graduate school. There's a lot of stories I could tell, but there's a few that stand out. One was, so I'm in my mid-20s, a kid from Iowa, never really been in diverse populations very much, and I'm working in correctional facilities in the state of Virginia in the early 1990s. It's war on drugs era, and I'm encountering a lot of racial diversity. One day in the hall, Dr. McCreary and I are talking, and we get into issues of race and culture, and I decide to ask him, how could I broach these topics in therapy with clients? And I'm going to take a little bit of creative license here, but this is the way I remember it. Dr. McCreary says, well, this is what I do. I say to folks, hey, I'm black and you're white. How are you doing with that? And I was, you can do that? So that's anecdote number one. Then I took family therapy from him. I teach family therapy throughout my career. I took family therapy from him. Now, this is 30 years ago. The thing I remember most distinctly from the class is Dr. McCreary was the only professor to show a tape of his own clinical work in class. The only professor I ever saw who showed his own clinical work. And I could describe to you that session that we watched in class 30 years later. Basically, it was a couple that was in a very difficult place, obviously. In the session, they were very shut down. Straight couple, I think the husband had his back turned to the wife. And Dr. McCreary asked a question. And it's not an information question. It's a really probing question. And you got the sense this was an important question. And neither of them answered. So Dr. McCreary asked the same question a second time. No answer. He asked the same question a third time. No answer, but you could tell that room was very intense. Some of you've done therapy can kind of feel what this is getting like. The fourth time, the fifth time, the sixth time, the seventh time, he asked the same question. I heard a clinician once say that this is the dog on a bone technique. Once you get on the right question, you just stick with it. And I was speechless. Like, you can do that? Like, I had never seen that sort of persistence. You're going to hear his warm heart tonight and his compassion, but don't let that fool you. This man is persistent when he needs to be, right? So last one was actually 2 years before I took the class. This is my first year in, first practicum in graduate school. A co-therapist and I are doing couples therapy. We had no business doing couples therapy. That's really hard to do. And we're not sure what we're doing. And in some training programs, they'll have a one-way mirror where the supervisor, he was our clinical supervisor, is outside watching what you're doing in the session from outside. Now, in some places, they give you a little headset where they can give you a show. We didn't have that. So that Susan and I are in there with this couple. We're both in our 20s. Again, this is like a couple in their 50s with 30 years of marital dysfunction. They were eating our lunch, right? And there's a knock on the door, and I go, and it's Dr. McCreary, and he calls Susan and I out in the hallway. And he's very calm, and he says something like, yeah, what are you seeing in there? What's going on? Now, the truth is, I'll speak for myself. I had no idea what I was seeing. I was like watching a train go by, I had no idea. And Dr. McCreary says something like, I think you two need to get a little more active. So we go back in. It's probably about 5 minutes, and there's a knock on the door again, and it's Dr. McCreary, and he calls us out in the hall a second time. You remember the family therapy video I described? Okay, so he says to us again, kind of calmly, I think you need to get a little more active, try and do something. We go back in, we barely had sat down, and there's a knock on the door again. So McCreary calls us out like 5 or 6 times. I don't even remember what we were saying. I don't know what we were trying to do, But we got the point. We couldn't sit there and just watch that train go by. We had to start to do something, right? Well, I don't think we really did anything there, but I can tell you this, 30 years later, and after thousands of sessions of couples therapy, there'll be times I'm in a session and I'm getting a little too passive, and I think I hear McCreary knocking on the door of my office, right? It sticks with me. Right? Thank you for being with us tonight. Come show him some of that.
I want to first begin with giving honor to the Creator, the Redeemer, and the Sustainer. Give honor to the ancestors. And as I was thinking about you all, the ancestors of Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells, Fannie Lou Hamer, Coretta Scott King, and Betty Shabazz came to my heart. And so I share them with you as we talk about this. And as I go through, you'll understand why they're so much with me. Give honor to all of my mentors and teachers, and I'll talk about them in a second. And especially, it's good to be here. I am humbled. I am deeply thankful. I do want to acknowledge the dean. As I went to church, I say the angel of the house. If I were in a church, Reverend Kimball, who was actually extremely unhelpful to me. No. To all of the faculty, administration, and staff. And I didn't realize I had so many friends here. You go a lot, but you don't realize, I consider Shelley Rambo a friend now. If it doesn't go both ways, I'm okay with that. But I'm there, whether you're there or not. I chased my wife for 7 years before she finally said yes. No, she said actually after 7 years, when I proposed to her, she said no 2 times. It was the 3rd time she finally said yes, and we've been married 42 years. So I do believe in asking the question again and again. I had done that before I learned how to be a therapist. I didn't realize this, but we have a symposium, international symposium every year in Korea. So Yanseo, to anyone that's here. And Dr. Dana Roberts actually was our speaker in 2022. And so I spent a week with her over there in Korea. This woman here, I should just bow, And then, of course, Dr. Sandage. I don't agree with any of his story. He has no proof of that. And Susan, I've already bribed her, so she will not confirm his story as well. And Dr. Akin Jones and I were actually on a board of Salvation Social Justice together. So that's there. So that's that stuff. So I wanted to talk about the journey. And I start, first of all, with my mom and dad over here. And mom and dad, literally this picture is my dad coming back from the military at my mom's prom. My mom was valedictorian of her class. That night, I was conceived by my virgin mother, and they got married that was in October, I guess. They got married in January, and then I was born in July. And so I'm a love child, hallelujah. But my dad, if you could see closely, you see I have his nose. I'm not 6'4" and as dark as he is, because mom is so light. I'm kind of in the middle with height and weight. And Dad was my hero. My father left the AME church and started his own church. And I still remember at 7 years old, my father preaching. And he preached me to salvation. When he finished that night, I was sleeping in my room, and in the far corner of the room, a light just showed up in my ceiling, and a figure came and a hand came and touched me and laid his hands on me. And I've never been the same. And I told him that, and so he wound up baptizing me. And that was beautiful. And then a few years later, in '67, we had the revolts in Detroit. And then we had another revolt in '68 after King was assassinated. And I remember my father putting me and my 6 siblings, I'm the oldest of 6 siblings, seven children, putting us in the bathtub to keep us safe. And while we're there in the tub, the house next door to us is firebombed. And I looked at my dad and I'm like, something's different. And then literally the next day we're out walking and the National Guard turned their cannon from the tank that they had at my father, and he freaked. And he went from being that wonderful man that he was to being, he beat me one time till my mother literally packed up her bags and brought her bags and slammed them in front of him and said, if you don't stop, I'm leaving you. And that was going on for a while. And that's there. So that's the beginning. I'll come back to that story. So we called my mother the Empress, and the 7 of us are there. The blessing for me was I played trumpet. I don't play saxophone. I played trumpet, and that was where I would find my solace. I told God that I know I'm called. I'll be a Christian if you want me to, but I'm never going to be a pastor. I'm never going to deal with this religion thing deeply. And jazz, let me just be, and let me be free. I still play. And then I was fortunate in my adolescence. This is Bishop C. J. Anderson, and he was the bishop of the Church of God in Christ Church, Great Lakes jurisdiction in Detroit, Michigan. But what's significant, because of my life, every Sunday I would come up to be saved. Every Sunday. I'd come up and I'd walk up. And one Sunday I walked up before Bishop, and he looked at me and said, Micah, if you take as much care of your soul as you do your afro, you're going to be all right. 1970s now, I had the fro. And it was deep to me because I literally would braid my fro up every night to make sure it was right. I wasn't like, it was tight. It was tight. When I played ball, it would fall back, it was tight. And then I went to this place called Engineering in Michigan, and it drove me crazy because it was just not right. And the main reason why it really was so hard was because as the oldest son there in my family, my dad has been gone. I became parental child to mom. And I felt guilty leaving my family to go to school. I felt bad not getting a job and helping out financially. And then my sophomore year, my brother, who's only 17 months younger than I, committed murder. Went to rob a drug dealer. Deal went bad. He killed the drug dealer with his own gun. And my brother somehow wound up getting 10 years to life. My brother was in Jackson prison, say right here. My family was in Detroit, Michigan, and I'm in Ann Arbor. And the weight of that was another piece. And so I joined a fraternity to keep me sane, became best friends with this woman here, 7 years. But I told her too, God just works. I don't know about you all, but God just works. I was player, I was player. And I went to Gamer. I was walking around the dorms looking, and I ran into this, and my heart was just gone. I knew I was over. Went back to my dorm, doc, and her high school, middle school, elementary school best friend was my boy on the dorm, and I didn't know that. And I came back and told him who I just met. He's like, no. You can't mess with her. She knows the Lord, and she literally has a boyfriend that's crazy. And so I became best friends with her. And so my friend, he was a drummer, and he went down to this guy's church to drum and dragged me down there with him. And it was there that this guy showed me that it wasn't about how well you preached. He was just with people. And he allowed me in the midst of the trauma and the stress on campus, not disordered trauma, to come down to his church and just sit with him and just talk. And I really learned that before I even became a therapist or a pastor, that sometimes it's just being, just being. And that could move me down to from who talks about more being when I finally got to seminary and started reading about that. Fieri, who talked about the pedagogy of the oppressed. This guy here literally taught me how not to be a leader. He was vicious. I don't think he knew that I had adopted the director of Christian education as a second mom, and he hated her and treated her disgustingly, in my opinion. And I realized, you can be an executive director and just be a bad person. To go on, I can go through each one of these. John Kinney, Charles Adams were just two who taught me, one to preach and the other to just really be free to be you, and all of that there. But I got to go Gwen Hawley. You can see the diversities. We talk about leading through your trauma and your pain. Gwen Hawley was a professor of psychology at the Presbyterian School of Christian Education. And I took a course with her called T Groups over the intensive January session. And in that session on January the 15th, no one mentioned Martin Luther King Jr. And I was hot. And so I wrote in my reflection that I'm mad at the class. They didn't mention this holiday or this, I don't think it was a holiday yet. This is early 80s. And she came back to class the next day and she wrote in my reflection, she handed it to me, she wrote in there, I think you should respect your class enough to talk about this. It's good that you just would complain to me in secret, but you should trust them. And again, I'm the only brown-skinned person in the room, and so I brought it up. And it was a conversation that was very helpful and very healing, and so that was there as well. Ev Worthington, our boy, I gotta put him up here, because Ev taught us both. I don't know if you were there when his mother was murdered, yeah. And when I first met Ev, he was a behavioral psychologist doing pain management stuff, and literally when his mother was murdered, he had to learn to forgive the murderer, and that moved him into reconciliation and forgiveness work. But I saw the trauma that caused the change, okay? So that's kind of here. You talk about where that came from in therapy. I'm at Philadelphia Child Guidance, and Whitaker stops in behind the mirror when I was behind the mirror. And he calls the phone, get out here. He wasn't as nice as I was. Get out here. I get to the room, he's like, I don't know who you are in that room, but you're not the guy that I've been knowing around outside the room. Get in the room and make crazy. That's all he said. And so forgive me in advance for making crazy. It's his fault, okay? Nakeem Akbar, of course, and the Association of Black Psychologists. I had to integrate a lot of this stuff, and Nakeem really helped me with that. Nancy Boyd Franklin helped me with that. Just people doing that. And then my final piece of this, there's a lot more going on, but was this woman here, Bell Hooks. I never got to meet her personally, but as I was saying this morning, my first year as a professor, I wrote an article on Black men and submitted it to a journal for publication. The article came back rejected, and the reviewers wrote on there, I don't know what the F is wrong with you. I heard about you from some of the people who mentored you. You're not writing like that. You're writing like a doggone Psych 101 person. And then she signed it Gloria Watkins. I'm like, who the heck is Gloria Watkins? And I went to find out that Gloria Watkins was Bell Hooks. And so I read everything that she wrote after that. And so a lot of what I'll talk about today too comes from that, okay? So that's me. Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. God understanding is unsearchable. God gives power to the faint and strength to the powerless. Even youth will faint and be weary, and the young will fall exhausted. But those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall, okay. So I start with, and I mentioned my dad because I wanted to come here with it, is that my understanding is that creates a soul wound. And a soul wound is really a painful problem that happens when you're raised without a parent, and have difficulty, for me, really putting together the male-female parts of who you are, okay? And the term is used to describe painful problems with humans, with or without a particular parent. And I'll say more as I get going through that as well. But it shapes us physically and emotionally. I think a lot of what I think of when we're teaching about and leading through the pain and the trauma and the things in life is that it manifests itself physically. And science has shown that it's actually there. I've got some psychological thoughts on how that manifestation actually occurs. Hopefully I'll get there. The injuries are directly related to our earthly parents' absence. And that's there. And parents don't have to be the physical people that are there as well. Like I said, when my boss went after my adopted mom, that was a wounding that happened as well. And an adult attachment happens when a parent is physically absent but psychologically present. That's my dad. When you walk like somebody, you look like, every time I look in the mirror, I saw the dude, okay? And so that's there as well. When the parent is physically present but psychologically absent. And I think that happens for a lot of us in a lot of ways. But the thing is, this results in heart problems. And for me, it's how do you teach through those? My brother and I have talked a lot about this as we work on writing his pieces after 40 years of incarceration, okay? And we know that he had a bruised heart, okay? Injured, battered, hurting. I kind of had that too a little bit, but I couldn't stay there because I had to carry out mom's wishes. I tell a story all the time, and forgive me if I get long. You've got to go home and go to bed. I'm okay with that. My plane doesn't leave till 6. But mom comes home from work, and we were on aid dependent children for about 2 years, and then she finally gets this gig. She comes home from work, and she's gonna make a peach cobbler, and all the peaches are gone. She goes, Micah, who ate the peaches? I'm not gonna snitch. I'm like, Mom, I'll go to the grocery store right now. I'll use my McDonald's money and get peaches. That's not what I ask you. Who ate the peaches? Like, Mom, line up. So we have to line up in birth order. So she hits me, wow. And then my brother's next. And before she can hit my brother, everybody yells out, Lydia ate it. Okay. I couldn't deal with a battered and be hurting. I had to get some things straight in that house. They had to understand that just because I'm nice, I don't need to be getting hit because you're scared. Steve gonna hit you. That's why you yell. Steve will hit you. I'm gonna do worse to you. Okay. I don't know what that is. Okay. Anyway, performance-based heart then became mine because I couldn't do the bruise. I couldn't walk around with injury. There was too much at stake. But what I did was I had a performance-based heart. I could not accept anything lower than an A. I couldn't accept being anything but first chair in trumpet. I couldn't, I had to be the best. I had to bring mom home A's. I had to set this example for my siblings. That was my piece there. My brother said what happened to him was he developed the hardened heart and the addicted heart. And I think about birth order, that I had sewn up the good child role at being number 1. And number 2 then became the bad child. And I thought about that one day, years later, how thankful I was after I left for college. I heard the stories of how my brother and his gangster self kept them safe. Okay, I kept them safe through me and through fighting, through martial arts, through Golden Glove boxing, through a crazy dog named Dusty. If I said sick him, my Doberman took off, Anyway, okay. So let me go into some of my stuff. Stories are rich. I include this in my book, and most folks don't understand the archetypes here. I took the bad archetypes out and just stayed with the pleasant ones. And maybe a year ago, I'm watching a television show. And in the television show, this man was abusing his wife, and I couldn't watch it. I turned it off, and I was just bothered, and I was triggered with rage. I wanted to grab the man through the television and kick his behind. I'm like, where is that coming from? It's just TV. It clicked. And forgive me for being this transparent, but my core trauma My dad had dragged my mom out of the house, dragged her across the street, had her against a chain fence and was hitting her like I would a man. And I ran out with a mop handle at 10 years of age to help my mom. And as she's taking this beating, she yells at me, "Micah, he's your father." And I was blown away. Fast forward, I'm 16, and I don't say this with any pride. I come home, and this guy that my mom was dating slaps her. Before I knew it, I grabbed the candle holder off the dining room table, and I launched it, and I hit him in the face. I don't remember much besides just how I lost my mind, but my brother tells me that I told them, "Go get my bat." And I beat that man so bad, he was in the hospital for 3 months. And I realized that that could have been the end of me being the perfect son. My mom said, "There's the only man beside my dad she'd ever loved." That crushed me. And so the warrior in me, the warrior, the hero, I had to submit, and it became a shadow, okay? What I wound up being comfortable being was this peaceful healer. I'm a therapist, I developed into all that, and didn't realize that I couldn't do the shadow because I was still so embarrassed, so injured by the beating I put on that man. You know, and it really woke me to the fact that so often in all the work I've been doing is like, I've been helping other folk integrate those two pieces, integrate that shadow piece with that personality piece. Because I love being a peaceful healer. That's my gifting. But I'm also a warrior hero. That's my power. And it's when those two are together, I'm a better Micah McCreary. I'm better than I am with just either one of them. You know, how do you become whole? And one of the things that I've just poured myself into with everybody I work with is finding that way of helping them be whole. Would you be whole? You know, I think of those 10 leopards. Would you be whole? Would you be whole? So with that, of course, one of the things that it's really shown up in my teaching is that great teachers master large group, small group, one-on-one. And I think with trauma, we've got to really figure out how do we handle trauma in large settings. It's really cool. The one-on-ones for me is easier, but I've got to figure out how to do it too in the large groups. And now I was talking in the podcast, one of my favorite experiences in life, and I am happy for this one, is that when I was training to be a president in 2006, 2007, it was right after the Virginia Tech shooting in Virginia. And so I'm training with the president, Patricia Cormier, at Longwood University. The woman was phenomenal. But one of the things that we did was began to teach the whole campus to be ready for an active shooter. So we started doing active shooter drills. And so when I finished the apprenticeship, I decided I didn't want to be a large university president. It just wasn't my calling. And so I went back and I asked for a Psych 101 class, 300 students again. I'm teaching my Psych 101, and day one, and you know, I taught it where I had Under the Bridge playing by Red Hot Chili Peppers. You know, I don't want to make you feel, you know, that's just blasting all out in the hall. Other professors would come, can you turn it down a little? I mean, just rocking, you know, riding down the aisle on the, you know, I can't ride a skateboard, but I'm riding them anyway, falling, having fun, just crazy, you know, doing that as well. And one of the things I did was I instituted an active shooter drill. And so we go out, and they go to their design places, they get safe, they come back into the room. And when they came back into the classroom, I just felt spirit-led to say to them, if we have an active shooter, I'm going to the shooter. I want you all to follow your leaders, and you all go safely. And that maybe that 5 minutes that I take that bullet, it'll save somebody's life. Okay, and so I did that, and I'm still being myself in class. I don't want to make you feel, you know. And this guy came in with a yoga mat, and I really am, you know, a martial artist. I really do love that stuff, you know. And so we talk about martial arts and yoga. And literally after the class semester ended, He took the book bag he brought to class every day to the university police, turned it in. The book bag had a semi-automatic weapon loaded and a number of ammunitions to shoot the class up. But he told them that I was going to shoot up that classroom, but I didn't want to kill McCreary. And I realized that trauma is in the big room as well as the small room. And it's how we do that work that really matters. And it's like, I don't mention the word trauma too often. I'm using it here because we're talking about it. But literally, it's always there. It's been there since my birth, I know when my daughter came, she was little, 5 pounds, 13 inches. My wife is little. And, she would not come. She's like, I'm comfortable in here. And some wise older nurse walks into the room and just says, just shift over. And she somehow shifted Makita, and Makita came shooting out. But the trauma was there because Jacqueline told her point blank, I'm too much disclosing, but I can't go home anymore, so I'm staying now. But she says point blank, that's it. We have one child. I said, okay, we have one daughter, biological. We've adopted a couple, fostered a couple, but we only have one biological. But so it's there in the large classroom. It's also there in the preaching at church. How do we actually talk about this in ways? And I've been doing that sermon on Wait on the Lord. And I use that sermon because that's what the pastor preached. He had that in Amazing Grace. And that was all, the sermons were terrible. But that moment of just hearing Amazing Grace in that text was beautiful, And I realized that was part of what helped heal me, was just that moment, that experience, both in worship. How do we do it? And then, of course, clinical supervision, Bible study, and consulting covers all three of these. And I think, those of us who really do this teaching really need to master all three. Some people are good at large rooms. People are good at the individual room. But if you really want to be good, I argue that. And I'm not an expert. Another piece was, of course, from counseling psychology. We had awareness, knowledge, and skill. You had to have the awareness, what was going on, the knowledge of what to do about it, and the skills to implement it. I add to, you've got to have the opportunity to safely and effectively practice and experience that. I think too often we teach stuff, we give folks the tools, but we don't give them the internships, the practicums, where they can actually do it, try it, and be safe at doing it. It's okay to mess up. I mean, it's okay. It's okay, it's okay to do it badly. You never get good without doing, perfecting. I'll never forget the first time I did play my tape. I played it at a lecture down at the medical college. And one person said, he didn't do what he's supposed to do. He just focused on the tape or something. Something stupid, I don't know what it was. And it crushed me. It was devastating until my therapist said, how many goods did you hear? I'm like, well, everybody else was good, but this one person, but that was probably what I needed, was how do I integrate it in a way where I'm talking about the story, but I'm also giving some substance, Hopefully I'll do that today. I leave this because, Holloway, her model, she's actually perfected. This wasn't developed this keenly when I was teaching supervision, but I love Holloway's model on clinical supervision. She says, and it starts in the center, it's the relationship that really matters. You've got to start there. I think too often we don't start with relationship. We think, I go back to Freud versus Jung. Freud was much more, let's be out of the relationship, where I love Jung because of no, let's get into the relationship. It's that does it. You understand more. I would just argue, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, Steve probably sees more out of what I'm saying than some of you who never met me before. That makes sense. And so that's a part of that's there. Culturally, you may see more than Steve would about where I'm going and what I'm saying. So there are pieces that are there in the relationship that really help you do it well. But each one of us in this dynamic has a role. So I love it that she looks at the fact that the organization has a role. So, Boston University, even when you're doing clinical work, they've got a role. They've got the mission, the structure, the management system that's going on, the culture, the climate, professional ethics and all. That's going on there as well. The client has a part to do with this as well. What are their characteristics? What's going on with them? The supervisee has, the experience, the technique. But what's really important, the pieces that I always focused on, was difference between function and learning. Okay, that when you're really teaching someone, you separate out what's my function here, what are the function that we're dealing with versus what the learning pieces are. So you want to learn counseling skills or case conceptualization, professional role, emotional awareness, self-evaluation. And based on where a person is, it differs what you do with them. So someone who's really emotionally aware and doing self-evaluation, then my techniques are probably more consulting or supporting, because they don't need as much. But someone who's really dealing with skills, then I've got to deal with monitoring, evaluating, instructing, and advising. And so you as a teacher in this change your function based on what the learning tasks are that they're doing as well. And that's been helpful both in business and in this as well. And then supervising, the professional experiences, your role, your orientation, your worldview, and your interpersonal style. To know all of those is critical to doing the kind of learning where it catches on fire. It may just be because I'm brilliant, but I doubt it. But to be the third person to really receive a PhD from the counseling psychology program at VCU, but by the time I left there as a professor, I had 19 PhDs. I can't even begin to say how many master's students and undergrad students who consider me a mentor. My richest experience for me was when I took undergrads to Haiti with me for 3 weeks, and we built houses. We went to the school system to work there. We counseled in the church, and it was so funny. They were so blown away because when I came, they were like, I guess the Messiah Junior showed up or something, and they were just lined up in a row, and I'm laying hands on people, and they're falling out, and I want to say to them, I don't know if I believe it or not either. But that's what I'm gonna keep, because you gotta be flexible. Why am I gonna judge you? And the reality was, it blew me away. Literally, this one guy that I laid hands on and prayed for 1 year, the next year became the student, the citizen of the month, the year in the village. And so it was deep in there. And I was coming to see him, to celebrate with him. Drove in, he's waving as I'm riding in on the van that year. And so literally, and then I'm up on the wall building a house, and someone comes running, Doc. I'm like, okay, come down. I want to go like, Ezra, Nehemiah. I can't come down off the wall because I don't know what the heck they were. This guy, I wouldn't say it's schizophrenia, but literally was biting, rolling in the dirt, speaking in an unknown language, like he was demon-possessed. And they really had the thought that he was demon-possessed. And so all I could do, my students are looking like, whoa. And I took him to the hospital. I bathed him. I had him shower. I didn't bathe him. I had him shower, gave him something to eat. I pulled in the social worker and took the word "campe," which means stand in Creole, and literally had given an acronym for him to be left with and treated him. And that happens, but students are watching that and seeing that it wasn't planned. It's just one of those things that happens. Okay. The other piece is using a liberation pedagogy, which is, for me, the foundation of that pedagogy is realizing and accepting that the Spirit is the knowledge. The Spirit is the teacher. The Spirit is the one who really does the work. Theory, for me, just became pivotal, that education is about freedom, that it's a problem-solving pedagogy, and rejecting the Becking concept of education. And those who've read Theory know that the Becking concept is that I'm the full picture as a teacher, and you're the empty vessel, and I want to pour myself into you. Reject that, that the person that you're teaching has as much to offer as you do. And so it's better if you figure out what's the problem we need to solve together and to go about that. And then, of course, Bell gave me the whole narrative approach to teaching, which also Charles Adams gave me. When he was teaching me to preach, and Charles Adams, if you ever get a chance to see tape on him, he's a Harvard Hooper. That man has a manuscript and can just go from page to page. And by the time he gets to say, thank you, arigato, gomapsamnida, but everybody's falling out. And so I came to him to learn how to preach, and I had a manuscript, and I'm trying to go, and he's like, put that down, You are a storyteller. Tell stories. You know, I didn't know that Fred Sampson was his best buddy, and Fred is a storyteller. And so, you know, but that's another story later on. Okay. Rejecting patriarchy. I'm sorry, anybody here that's really into patriarchy, I apologize in advance. I just reject it. If you notice, most of the pictures up there had women, and they taught me more than I know. And then, you know, and it happened, you all weren't there, but it happened today in the room where the great Dr. Shelley Rambo had to answer questions because I couldn't answer them, you know, and tell people, you know, I mean, it's beautiful, you know, and it's okay in the room. I don't recognize, it's not just me, it's like the whole thing that happened, okay. Authoritative approach, and there, for me, my daughter helped me with this. You know, you have to have high limits and high love. And the higher the limits you want to give someone, the higher the love, in order to stay balanced. And so a lot of times, you know, when she was young, I literally would take her to the mall, and girlfriend would walk, you know, and so I said it, well, okay, this is your space. We look at a square in the floor. You can play in this space. If you don't, you know, go outside the space, we go home, you know. And I mean, she loved going there, getting candy, having our time, daddy-daughter time. And she would invariably, you know, do this. And a few minutes later, and then finally she'd do this. And when she did, I'm like, well, let's go, you know, and we head home. And it really is cool. It works well in therapy too, anyway. What am I saying here? Pastoral, professional awareness of my own transformation. So with Bill, I use personal narrative to humanize and enhance the capacity to know. I didn't go back and read her book to answer these questions. This is really coming straight out of my heart, but she has a book, Teaching to Transgress. If you really want to read it, she talks about it there. But it removes the professor from being the teaching interrogator. I think too often, particularly when you work with folk who are trying to get it, and a new therapist trying to get it, you don't need to be the interrogator. You know, you need to really be a person who's just in that moment. I was sharing with someone earlier, you know, one of the things that became cool for me was that in order to heal someone, you got to walk into their trauma, walk into their pain, walk into the story. Even if I didn't think this guy had schizophrenia, for that moment he thought he had, so I had to walk into the schizophrenia with him. You know, even in that moment, he thought he would demon possess whatever it was. I had to walk into that demon possession with him. I think too often we minimize somebody else's pain. We minimize somebody else's concept of what they're going through because it doesn't agree with ours. And if you really want to heal someone, you have to be willing to walk into that someone's brokenness, you know, and that's not comfortable. But if you're, you know, insane like me and you've been around it your whole life, it just becomes natural. And there's a difference there. Disrupting the idea that professor is omnipotent, all-knowing, and without a spot or a blemish. I mean, I really do think I know a lot, but my 7-year-old goddaughter, I just bought her a Barbie car. And we're riding down the street, she's driving the Barbie car. She's just happy she can be rolling. And she looks at me and said, God, Daddy, you know a lot of things, but my daddy knows 100 things. And she keeps going. I'm like, okay, you know. And it's amazing because literally, her father came to me when she was 16 and said she wanted to be a psychologist. And she joined my interventions at the church, doing the work with the Impact program. And then she went to college, and her father died suddenly of cancer the first year. I tried to step up as a dad, and she let me know right away, you ain't my daddy. And she was clear about that. It was really good. But when she finished undergrad, she was one of the most outstanding psychology students for the year. And I offered her a program, admission and scholarship to come to New Brunswick, and she came. And it's amazing that, you know, she taught me so much, even as my student. And when she finished her PhD, I knew I could leave. I didn't like, after 3 years, I knew I wanted to leave ECU. I stayed 21 years until she finished. And when she was done, I was able to go. Now she's actually back there now as a professor. They got the best part of me. I'm like, yes, take her, you know. But now, this is another piece that I throw out, hope you get it. This is Micah McCreary, but avoiding triangulation. And the thing is that many folk who are talking about trauma, they're in this victim spot, and I use, they're also, whether you're a servant or a sheep, so I don't talk about just trauma. But in order to be a victim, guess what? You've got to have a persecutor. Okay, you can't be in the victim role without identifying someone as your persecutor. Okay, but then the top piece that you have to have, if in order to really have that triangulation, someone has to be the savior in the system. And typically most of us want to be saviors. We become pastors because we want to save folk. We want to be the shepherd, want to be the healer, want to be the advocate. The healing piece and the secret is that you have to become comfortable in all three spaces. Okay, you have to recognize that sometimes you're going to be the sheep, the victim, and be okay with that, deal with that. Sometimes within yourself, you're going to be the persecutor. Sometimes you have to be the antagonizer, the provocateur. That's it may be necessary. Be okay with that. And sometimes you have to be the healer. You have to be the helper. And when a person gets to the point in their life where they can be in all three of those conditions with health, even simultaneously sometimes, okay, that's when you really are getting beyond being able to be broken. Because whatever it is, you can deal with it. When someone throws you and dogs you out, like right now in our country, I'm okay because this ain't the first time. I can be the victim for a minute, but while history doesn't repeat itself. History teaches. Okay. Now this is me. Forgive me, but as I was just saying, my persona is that person that's really the peacemaker warrior. My shadow is the hero, and you got that going on with someone. Underneath, it really happens when you connect the male and the female parts of us. And I'm not getting into gender. I'm being psychological about this. There's a lot of us that really has that piece where it's strong. It's strong where strong that it cares deeply. Strong in that it loves deeply. Strong in that it organizes deeply. Strong, however you want to make it, and all that has to come together within the self where you're okay with that. Shadow work, the process of integrating the shadow is like alchemy, okay? The inner transmutation. And that's the piece I think a lot of us forget is to do the shadow work. For me, trauma work, I could switch it by just saying shadow work. They quite often the trauma has become the shadow, all right? And that's just clinical. And the question you asked about research, and I forgot to say it, but one of the things that I will to say about doing research is really understanding what's the difference between best practice and empirically validated practice, and when do you use one, when do you use the other? I think we don't focus on that. We don't give either. If we're a practitioner, we just go for best practice being my sole strength, and we don't recognize that. No, I also need to know there's some guidelines empirically I need to incorporate into those too. And I think that's one of the places where interdisciplinary research could really grow, is looking at that. And I got some other stuff too, but I forgot it. Our wounds, transforming our wounds into wisdom. This is going to be the churchy part, the preaching part, so forgive me. Our wounds into wisdom, our fears into courage, our limits into boundless potential. Where am I going? I mentioned this in the talk, but for me, this is Frankel. Everything can be taken from a woman, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. I just value that so highly, and I call it the holy pause. It's really that piece of going over the threshold. How do we go over that threshold? The holy pause for me is purposeful dying on Holy Friday, and then fruitfully descending, which leads to Holy Saturday. Before you even get to resurrection. If you don't strategically die, I don't just die, by happenstance. Everything is strategically done, and that's where the system thinking comes, and then you fruitfully descend because you've done it that way, which then leads to the Holy Saturday. What do I mean by that? Descending and ascending. We focus just on that, but the you matters in doing this, and the you is that when you descend, this is the Holy Friday, the descent, then there's the Holy Saturday. What you do here dictates your elevation. What you do here transfers to how high you ascend. More folk don't come out of trauma well because they don't do the work when the trauma happens. And one of the things I try to do is help people realize that this experience is coming to you as a gift from the universe. Take it and use it. You know, I wish I didn't have to have my brother go to jail and be jailed. Yeah, I do. But point blank, because of the pain that he was going through, the drug use, the drug dealing, he would have been dead without the 40 years. Now, my brother, for the first time in my adult life, I am at peace with my mom because my mom is with my brother. But my brother's doing so well because when he was released from prison, my wife and I gave him a gift that allowed him to start a new life. You know, it's the system that's there. I had learned that, though, in 1986. I'm working with a guy who came from prison. I was talking to my brother. He said, look, you need to start saving now. If he ever gets out, you know, in order for him to be a man, he doesn't need you to loan it to him. He doesn't need to be begging. You need to just walk up and say, here's a gift. Well, when my brother came out, I was stuck. I had the money. I didn't know what to do with it. On New Year's Eve, something happened. Christmas Day, my youngest brother, the four of us brothers, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, put in the hospital, put in a coma immediately. On New Year's Eve of that 2018, my brother was released. Let me back up a little bit. He's released July 3rd, 2018. He, I, and my other two brothers, for the first time together in one space in 40 years. We just had a good time going to Starbucks. I bought him cowboy boots. You know, I mean, we had a time. But then in December 25th, my brother, the youngest of us, the best of us, goes into the hospital, pancreatic cancer. On New Year's Eve, it's my brother's that just released from prison, his first birthday since being released from prison, and my brother dies. We had planned a celebration for him, and he says, I don't want the celebration. The matriarch stands up and says, we're having a celebration. At the celebration, you know, everybody's talking, a little pain there. Mom hits the glass. I got something to say. She stands up. She turns to Stephen and says, Stephen, forgive me for saying your name, bro. She turns to my brother and says to him, Timothy died on your birthday. It's not a mistake. It's not an accident. It's a God wink. It's God speaking to you, saying that you're now the only McCreary male here in Detroit. Micah's up in Jersey. Thomas is in Wisconsin. You're here with me now. And you can't, no more gambling, no more tripping. You got to be the boy that I raised you to be. I looked at my brother. I went like, he ready for the money now. You could see the physical transformation in his being that happened when Mom gave him that pair. And I told Mom, I said, Mom, you're the therapist. That's the best paradoxical intervention I've ever seen. You know, she reframed that thing. I'm like, yes, woman, go. That's probably where I got it from. What's you know?
So let me introduce these folks, and then we'll invite you up to the table.
Okay.
M. Mookie C. Manalili. Mookie is interested in suffering, embodiment, narratives, virtues, and ethics. In terms of formation, he's received an engineering degree from Loyola Marymount University, theological pedagogy degree from Notre Dame, and clinical social work and theology degrees from Boston College. Mookie trained as a licensed independent certified social worker, psychotherapist who blends narrative therapy, psychoanalysis, logotherapy, body-based techniques, and mindfulness. In terms of communities, Mookie is involved with the Psychology of the Other Conference, the Center for Psychological Humanities and Ethics, and the Danielson Institute Center for the Study of Religion and Psychology. He's pursuing his PhD in pastoral theology and psychology at Boston University, working with me. It's been great. In his various roles, Mookie hopes to participate in our duty to better our society, particularly for folks who suffer injustices, for the widow, orphan, and stranger, for a future and world beyond oneself. Glad you're with us tonight. Please. Dr. Emily M. Towns, Martin Luther King Jr. Professor of Religion and Black Studies. Boy, that sounds great. That is great. Dr. Towns, an American Baptist clergywoman, is a native of Durham, North Carolina. She holds a Doctor of Ministry degree from the University of Chicago Divinity School and a PhD in Religion and Society and Personality from Northwestern University. Dr. Towns was the Dean and University Distinguished Professor of Womanist Ethics and Society and University Distinguished Professor of Gender and Sexuality Studies at Vanderbilt University, becoming the first African American to serve as Dean of the Divinity School. And I could repeat that designation numerous times. Oh, I'm not done. Towns was elected a fellow in the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. She was the first Black woman to serve as a president of the American Academy of Religion, the first Black woman to serve as the president of the Society of Christian Ethics, and she's the founder of the Womanist Leadership Hub that seeks to be a networking hub for Black women activists, clergy, laity, organizers, scholars, and students. A lot of where your heart is, I know, is in that. So thank you both for being with us. And invite you each to share some reflections on Dr. McCreary's talk. We'll start with you, Mookie.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm truly honored to be here. Thank you, Dr. Reverend McCreary. Mentorship, means a lot to me, so it's such a treat to see a mentor to my mentor. Truly, thank you for your words. Michael Mookie Cruz Manalili and I hail from the island of the Philippines. I grew up in a little village that was inside a rehabilitation center. I was not a high school love child, but my mom and dad was a nurse and a guard over there. And my dad was also very persistent and cooked her meals every week until they fell in love and eventually had me. But this rehab center had inmates, folks who were deemed as other in society, and they were the ones who taught me to play chess or climbed up the little coconut trees or hooped with me in basketball. They were some of my first teachers that taught me of the meaning of social work. I was also educated by pink-habited nuns. That's what my school was ran by, and I thought the Catholic Church was ran by women. Kind of still stand by that. Shout outs to any Catholics watching. So that's where I first learned theology, that it could be caring and play kickball with you, but it could also be very stern and let you know when you've stepped outside of that box, you're going home from that mall experience. So I moved around a lot in my life, 17 times at this point. So I am a migrant, and I have been much more vocal about that, especially in the current social political climate. And it's something that I carry, I think, as one of these soul wounds. I would say it's not a paternal one, but maybe to this new motherland. And I'd say that my attachment style is quite disorganized, as this Lady Liberty called us from across the sea. And let's just say that we have not been sold the Bill of Rights for this quote-unquote American dream. So a couple responses that really strike at me. I'll pick three, and then I actually dusted off an old poem. And I offer that because, I feel like poetry captures it a little better. But the idea of a suffering God, me and Steve actually just wrote a little paragraph about this recently. But I've been thinking of what suffering means to different religions and faith traditions, to psychotherapy. I think a lot of psychotherapy and psychoanalysis might see the wound as something to be reduced symptom-wise, but not something to be entered into. And I've always been finding that striking. There are some theorists that kind of go into the weeds of it, not unlike Jung. Jung has a book on the wounded healer that talks about how healing sprouts from this. I also remember when Steve taught us about the Hmong culture, the shamans that are born from that community actually go through suffering. They don't get theological degrees, but if you endure healing of an illness, then you might be deemed as a shaman. It's very, very interesting. Also, Moltmann's understanding of the suffering God, right? We enter into the wound. God's glory is revealed not in power, but in that Good Friday, Holy Saturday, Easter Sunday. And there's something really poignant about that. Lastly, too, Jung noted in his book on the answer to Job, it was interesting because he actually frames Hasatan, or the adversary, as the interjected shadow side of God. I have never seen that framing before. But as I hear Dr. Reverend McCreary talk about the shadow as something you have to integrate, it is interesting that the eldest book in our scriptures, right, talk about a God who integrates both. One of the other things that strikes me too is the idea of, I think, silence. Like the idea of mysticism has been sitting with me lately. I wonder why silence and mysticism has been kind of sitting, but yeah, now in therapy, when I'm sitting one on one with the person, sometimes it's just a whole lot of silence. And I'm like, is anything happening? I mean, I'm getting paid the same for this 50-minute session. So, like, feel free to use it how you want. But if you can tolerate the unspeakable, there is something pregnant about that silence. I think the tohu wabohu is how we speak about the Genesis accounts, and it is a deep, pregnant darkness, and there's something I think there. Also, I think the mysticism that was infused from the places that my homeland was colonized through, so it's kind of a love-hate there. But the versions of Catholicism that came to the Latine and the Catholic places in the Philippines was late Spanish medieval mysticism. Notice these are also the roots of liberation theologies, whether it's Gutierrez's theology of liberation, or I would even argue maybe echoes later through the Thermatic tradition, shout out to Dr. Shively, or even in Cone's right, cross and the lynching tree. The seeds of liberation are sown in the deep, deep silences of being able to bear witness to that woundedness, to bear witness to that Good Friday. I don't even know what Easter Sunday looks like, honestly, for our nation, for our field right now, but I live in deep, dark hope for it. And I think God's glory hopefully will be revealed when we accompany our siblings in death suffering. So I prepared a poem called The Wounded Healer. It's a psalm of compassion, and it's written after Psalm 22. I was gonna go into like the neuroscience and the empirical studies of like trauma research and whatnot. I could cook that way too, but I was like, nah, I feel like I gotta honor Dr. Reverend today. So, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, ruach, breathe upon me. In the heart of this darkness, these words of praise I fail to utter. In my own heart of hardness, broken tones I raise, I choke and sputter. Ironic, my sight drowns in these rivers of tears, yet my tongue is parched, thirsting for the living streams. My instincts flooded with rotting incense of fears, the fragrance of burnt doubt, tasting the decaying dreams. The blooming blood rose of a rose that wilts bereft, the thorns that left stigmatas upon our palms to share. The weight of the vineyard's work that I may lead what's left, the thorny crowns piercing my torn thoughts to wear. The severing of family branches through death and debt, a fashioning of a cross from its trunk for me to bear. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, ruach. Breathe upon me, ne ruach Elohim. Breathe into me, clear the scales and let me see. Imago days, my eyes are adjusting to the dark deep, caught within the blacks of your iris, the silent gaze you keep. Perhaps darkness is not but soil for compassion to grow. Sprouting underneath is the roots of our yearning. Silent dark earth, it's here that the other plant seeds to sow. With 30 palms and psalms, how to be human we are learning. In solitude, I encounter the unfolding mystery revealing. In darkness, I see the starry eyes of the others and others. In suffering, I live and share with the poor in their healing. In empathy, I embrace the messy humanity of our sisters and brothers. In this heart of darkness, these words I now freely utter. No bonds of death can chain my heart that freely flutters. Beloved, here I am. Face of Christ, here you are. Siblings, here they are. Love, here we are. Thank you, Reverend Doctor.
I wasn't quite sure why you would ask a grumpy social ethicist to talk about trauma informed leadership. Um, so I read all the stuff. I went through all the slides. I know there were many more. Just so everybody knows, there's lots more to come at some point, but I don't know when we'll see them. And then I just sat with it for a bit. And there was something about your use of the word wounds that clicked for me. There is a film called Daughters of the Dust, and it's the story of a South Carolina Sea Island family that is getting ready. The bulk of the family is going to move from the Sea Island to New York City. And the film is the couple of days before they leave. And there's all sorts of things going on. The matriarch of the family, Nana Pazant, doesn't want them to go, but understands they're going to go. So she sets out working routes for them and giving them all sorts of things to take with them to protect them. And then another storyline that's going on is the woman Eula and her husband Eli. Eula is pregnant, but we don't know, the characters don't know who the father is because she had been raped by a white man. And she won't tell Eli who he is because she knew he'd go and kill him, and then she'd lose her husband. But the story is narrated by the unborn child. And the audience knows this child is telling the story of his two parents, Eli and Eula. There's another character that comes back to the island as others are preparing to go, the character of Yellow Mary. Yellow Mary, 2 years before, had been raped by a white man, and her husband could not stay. He couldn't take what it meant that he could not protect his wife. She turned to the oldest profession in the world for women. And when she came back, she was being ostracized by the other women in her family system, except for Eula. Eula and Nana Pazant started to love her back into wholeness. They're now at the big meal before everybody's going to get on the boat to go the next morning. And the women are just cackling, click, 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 talking about Yellow Mary. And Eula, who's very quiet and not at all boisterous, hush, hush. Needless to say, she got their attention. And then she says this: there's going to be all kinds of roads in life to take. Let's not be afraid to take them. We deserve them because we're all good women. Do you understand who you are and what you've become? We're the daughters of those old dusty things Nana carries in her tin can. We carry too many scars from the past. Our past owns us. We wear our scars like armor for protection. Our mother's scars, our daughter's scars, our sister's scars, thick, hard, ugly scars that no one can pass through to ever hurt us again. Let's live our lives without living in the folds of old wounds. The image and embodiment for me of a trauma responsive leader as a womanist Christian social ethicist who can be very grumpy some days explores the interplay between doubt and hope, not as polar opposites, but as necessary to each other as we try to fully be present in leadership that places whole people with all their ways of being in the world at the center of what we understand we should be doing and feeling when we say leadership. You see, I tend to think that doubt can be a good thing because doubt is often the sign that we are seeking, yearning, chasing belief. Not just a belief in the divine, but a belief that God loves us, God rocks us, God cares for us. And God does not leave us even when we feel abandoned and alone, even when we think the task before us is too large or too complex for us to handle. For it is there, particularly there, just as we have reached so deeply into doubt that we believe that it is the only thing that will quench our thirst, that God comes to us, and we can then begin to hope. So I don't think doubt is the end product on the assembly line of our lives. No, I think it is simply a part of the journey, part of the way in which we come to know God's way in our lives with a richness that ripens and deepens. Doubt, earnest and soul deep searching can lead us into commitment that changes our lives each day as we move from experience to story to discipleship to testimony to faith. To wed our doubts with a sturdy hope that helps us take hard looks at the world around us, while also gathering the determination that we can live into our calls, large and small, to be people of faith who live it with passion and vigor and refuse to let the world as it is now be the standard of excellence, as if excellence is built on tolerating human misery or devaluing people or ignoring sin as it quickly shifts to evil. Hope becomes doubt's familiar that guides us and carries us beyond the what if to the what can be. Hope keeps us connected to our humanity and our values and our world. We hope to live on into the next generation, and we expect God's judgment, God's salvation in this world. And it is right smack dab in the midst of this rich hope that I find a space for us to develop leadership that is caring and seeks healing of body, mind, spirit, and soul. It is the new heaven and new earth. As I listen to Dr. McCreary tonight, and through the slides, and through all the emails, thank you, Andrew, I did so through my ethicist ears and feel the impact of the good challenges that can come from being a trauma-responsive leader with my old school Baptist heart. I am heartened that we can become the leaders that are needed for these times we are in. And we can run on and bring others with us to see what good end is waiting for us. As Katie Cannon used to say, morning by morning and day by day. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Towns, and thank you, Mookie. Micah, come on up. We're going to field some questions. You've shared a lot. you've surfaced a lot.
Mm.
So let's open it up to some questions.
Thank you for sharing your story. There's a few things that I was curious about, and some of the commentaries you just shared. The idea of being present, and also it seems like one of the things I was getting at, this idea of being fully present, but being flexible to be able to adjust and to center the individual, and so it's this idea, and I'm asking this to see if this is your intention with the narrative, in terms of, for example, you didn't have an exact answer to how you was going to give your brother the money, or you didn't have the exact way that you wanted to solve an issue, but somehow it seemed like there's a narrative of being present and allowing the answer to come to you by pulling from the environment, the people, and whatever. Some people say you get moved by the Spirit. God sends you a message, and then you know that it's His, not yours, because it's a gift, it's a deliverance. So I'm curious if that's your intention, or how would you explain your leadership decisions in a responsive way? I hope that was okay with the question.
What if it wasn't? Okay. Okay. I answer it this way. My father and I, on Christmas Eve of 1985, reconciled in the basement of my mother's home for about 4 hours of conversation. He then dies February 14th, 1986. At that time, I'm a youth pastor. I'm finishing seminary. I wound up going on to graduate school. I'm at Child Guidance Hospital. I was assigned a severely abused child, did therapy with him to get him to be whole again. He was tearing away anatomical dials from his father's abuse of him. Judge then wound up, because of conversations, assigning me to work with the father and the son before he reunited them. In that work, I had to deal with the abuser and the abused in this family, and realize that was also in me. Tell the story because after that, I'm returning back to become a professor at Virginia Commonwealth University. I found a letter my father had written me in '86 that I could not open in '86. I opened it on the way home from Philly to Richmond. And the letter said, and I remember it so clearly now, Micah, thank you for forgiving me. I'm now in therapy. I now know what I want to be for the rest of my life. I want to be a clinical psychologist. So for me, it unfolds, and I'm comfortable being in the unfolding. Okay, the wounds, it's amazing. Dr. Katie Cannon used to send women to work with me in therapy when she finished and said, now you need to do some work with a man. There's so many connections. There's so many tentacles. And if we're comfortable just being in those, it reveals itself.
You spoke about wholeness and trauma. As a first year MDiv MSW dual degree student and an individual who obtained their BA in psychology, I'm interested. Two things. I may only get to one or ask one, but I'm interested in ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And from the context of the conversation, how one navigates it. I'll frame my question this way because it's my theory, and I know we have many scholars in the room who may agree or disagree. But I have a theory that there is always a child inside of us who is yearning to be loved, to be protected, to be nurtured, to be affirmed. And so, through the lens of today's topic, leading through and beyond wounds, what would you say, or what would be your pedagogical framework or advice to leaders who are, pastorally speaking, bleeding on their congregations, or to professors who are lashing out on students because something within them is broken? And I don't want to use the word broken or unhealed, unwhole.
Mhm. I think systemically, I always think systemically now. And so I call it having your own board of elders. And I say to everybody, you need your personal board of elders. And that should include, someone who loves you unconditionally, someone who can call you out and hold you accountable, someone who can do the deep therapy work that needs to be done, someone who can be a professional coach or a spiritual director, someone who can handle your finances and your money, and you find folk that, and you have them there. And what I've known and what happens for leaders is the more you do that, somebody's going to call you out on one of these, and so the multitude of counselors, there's wholeness, and there's got to be a multitude, and because sometimes you need to go off, sometimes you need to act up, sometimes you need to laugh, sometimes you need to cry, and to get to that place, I think right now, I think my nose has been this size since I was born, because they called me horse nose as a kid, but my wife was point blank, like, I love that big nose, sir, and I was that, boom, I'm good, whatever, I have no idea where that came from either, I am so thankful you asked the question, because you had that probing focus throughout. So thank you. If you had asked the question, I was going to go home sad, depressed, anxious. No.
I'm really so thankful to the divine that I'm here tonight. I didn't know what to expect, and it couldn't be any more right on the money. And I don't believe that in coincidence today at all. I mean, just the way things have been really transpiring for me in the past, probably 6 months to a year. I see I'm definitely being led, for sure. I think I lived my life unconsciously with under this unconscious. I forget who said this, but it's like most people. I think it goes like this: afraid of letting go of the suffering, of the fear of the unknown, so that you're suffering because it's familiar. And that was the story of my life, and that was impacted by trauma. But I also know that today, as working through my shadow stuff, and don't get me wrong, there's times I still wake up early mornings with wounded parts that I could just love and nurture and try to make safe. Because that's, I think, probably, my opinion, part of the world's problem, not feeling safe in their bodies. And a lot of people act out, which I did my whole life. But to really just love those wounded parts of me, they're not necessarily bad today. I just bring them in. I just kind of, if they're not done best good, I just tell them to go back to the bleachers today and thanks for the help. I got this from here, And, I think a lot in, as I'm trying to evolve, I'm just trying to put a story together so in a more coherent way, because I know my primary purpose is why I'm here in the third school is to be of maximum service to my brothers and sisters and to really let my light shine. And nothing speaks louder than energy. When I can go in a toxic situation today amongst my family members, 'cause I was a scapegoat, and I'm ready to the truth seeker, and no one wants to hear the truth. A lot of people don't want to hear the truth about trauma and wounds. When I go there and I leave in an appropriate state and maintain my center, they can't point the finger and shake their heads because nothing lies like energy. I mean, speaks the truth like energy. You know what I mean? We place your attention, we place your energy. And I tell you, I'm just really so grateful these days, you know, to divine and for putting me in a wonderful place like this. So thank you.
I say. And they call that the divine appointment. And it reminds me, 9/11 in Richmond, I'm walking to my office with a student. I just met his father in August and learned that his father was from New Jersey, but worked in New York in the tower. And as we're walking, we find out that the tower's just been hit. He then goes and found out that his father, the wonderful thing, the story that was told when he got there, was that his father went down the stairs, got his whole department out, and then looked back at the building and saw the door was closing and getting people stuck in the building. So he went back and he held the door open. And while holding the door open, the building collapsed on him, you know. And we developed a ministry, Hold the Door for Others, where we just did grief work for years after that, you know, to honor his dad. And you don't know. I mean, why did I meet his father? Why was I working with him as a colleague, a trainer, you know, and then become a part of this ministry? Yeah, thank you. Inshallah, alhamdulillah.
Hi, thank you so much for this. I'm still thinking about your question that you asked earlier about what you taught us. You paused like 10 or 15 minutes into the presentation and asked what we had learned. And I heard people give answers like sort of honoring like our ancestors and the value of storytelling. And I was thinking that your presence had taught me a lot. Like I felt those things through you and through the way that you showed up. And I guess to give a little bit of background about how I'm orienting to this question, I'm like a new therapist at the Danielson Institute and thinking a lot about how to bring my own presence into the room with clients. And I guess I wanted to hear from you, like, I'm imagining that's something you've had to like cultivate. And so I want to know what you had to let go of and what you had to embrace to start bringing your presence into alignment with your body and where you physically are.
I still fight with pleasing everybody and making sure that I do the best and a good job, as opposed to just being. And that's been the through line, you know, from early on. You know, just be, Micah, just be, because the gifts are there. You know, this dude wouldn't have picked you if the gifts weren't there. You know, the gifts are there, and how do we just be more rather than have more? Because we're a have more culture. We want to get more stuff, get more skills, rather than be more. And so that's been the through line. The biggest thing I had to give up was that. The other, for me, I think I've always worked 3 jobs because I swore I never wanted to be poor again, you know, and functioning there, and then realizing that there's an integration that needs to happen with all these things that you're now doing. And I always tell the story, my wife says I go to Hurlbut Street whenever I get stuck in a sermon and it's not going the way I want to. I go to Hurlbut Street, which is where I was born. And my favorite story is coming home from McDonald's at 14. The lights are out in the house. There's no food in the house. And I'm just irate, like, this is ridiculous. And I walk up the stairs to tell my mother and get her straight about this. And her door to her room is closed. My mother had a wall of mirror doors that she left one open to keep the door from the room closed because she wanted her children to always have access to her. But it was closed this time. And I got ready to knock, and she's like, come on in, Micah. And I come in and she's kneeling at the bed praying. She's like, pray with me. She puts her hand up. And I'm like, I don't want to pray. You know, this God, this is another opportunity. You know, God's done this again. And I'm tripping out about it. But I know if don't listen to Mom, I'm going, you know, it ain't going to go good. And so I kneel out of obedience, not out of, you know, wanting to be praying to God. And while I'm kneeling, I can pray quietly. So I'm like laying God out, like, you did this again. You done let us down again. You know, da, 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 da. Where are you? So forth and so on. In the middle of all of that, there's literally a knock on the door. And this happens to others. So it's not just my story. But I go downstairs, and it's this blue-haired woman who I can't stand because she sided with Daddy, you know. She's at the door, and I open it, and she called me Micah. Couldn't even say Micah. Micah, you know, Micah, the Lord told me y'all needed something. Here's $50 and a bag of groceries. And this is 70, 19, you know. And I'm like, okay, you know, okay. I don't understand it, God, but okay. And that's the other through line. So there's this one of pleasing, and there's this one of just knowing God can make a way out of no way. You know, through it all, I've learned to trust in Jesus. I've learned to depend upon God through it all. You know, I've learned to depend upon God's word. You know, and I can go further. I mean, so many times that's happened. It's like, whoa, okay. You know, and time where, you know, God taught me so much in the darkness, in the muck, and left me there a while too. I'm okay with that. I remember I had ulcers at 16, taking exams, total blank out, you know, nothing on the paper but my name. You know, I've had many tears and sorrows. Anyway.
Why was Thelonious Monk there?
Miles Davis was really my hero too. Doc Severinsen. I had a lot of musicians, and they were all trumpet players. And as I got into each one, I found pieces of them that I just couldn't sit with. But Thelonious would do odd things with his music. You know that, yeah. You know, I mean, he hit augmented a chord, you know, and he was okay with that. To me, he didn't sound good, but he was phenomenal. And that stuck with me with him, you know, as opposed to the others. I really was more I turn my back to the audience and do my thing. But Thelonious, he embodied what I wanted to be, what I needed during that time. You know, because we had the black exploitation movies going on, Shaft and everybody else, you know, and he was just different. He was authentic. He was real.
That's what you are.
Yeah. Thank you.